So, quadratic formula and the discriminant. We'll probably just get through the quadratic formula and then we'll kind of finish with the discriminant tomorrow, even though the discriminant is really just a part of the quadratic formula. So, the quadratic formula is one of those that you can use at any point. Okay, I can always use the quadratic formula. It's always there. It's always available. And there's never not a time that I can't use it. Okay, it's just sometimes it's not always the most beneficial way because it can get kind of long and drawn out whenever it doesn't need to. So the formula is right there kind of at the bottom where it says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that is one formula. Yes, you will need to know it. You will need to remember it. That is your responsibility. So this is the fourth way that you have to solving any sort of quadratic. Now, I would tell you that if you can factor it first. Okay, because if you can factor it or you can isolate it, do that first because there's not as much and it won't be as long of a process as the quadratic formula. Okay, so whenever you're given your test and there's going to be 3 of them, there's going to be 3 problems right at the end that's going to say you solve it however you want to. You can use the quadratic formula every single time if that's what you want to do. But know that that's probably going to be the longer of the 4 ways. Now, in some cases, that's the only option you have. But I would definitely go through, can I factor this? Yes. If I can factor it, then factor it. Okay, because that's going to be a lot easier and your numbers are going to be easy to work with. Okay, if you can factor any of these, your numbers are going to be easy to work with. If you are really good at completing the square or if you can isolate it, okay, isolate it. The main time you want to isolate is whenever you do not have a b value or an x value. If you have an x squared and a constant, that's whenever you probably want to, you may be able to factor it, but that's probably when you will want to solve by isolation or using square roots, whatever you want to call that. So this is the quadratic formula. Okay, A goes with the value that's in front of x squared. B goes with the value that's in front of the x. C goes with the value that is your constant, that has no x value or x with it. Okay. Then tomorrow we'll talk about the discriminant and the types of solutions and things of that. So whenever we use the quadratic formula, the first thing that I need to do is get everything on one side. So if I have 3x squared plus 8x equal to 35, then I need to first make it to where it is 3x squared plus 8x minus 35 equal to 0. Okay? I want to zero everything out. I'm looking for the zeros. Okay? Zeros is just another term for the solutions or the intercepts of my graph whenever we actually do graph it. So again, this is one of those things, it's completely up to you how you do it. What I always do is I will write A, B, and C. That way I know exactly what needs to go where and I can just plug and chug into my formula. So A's 3, B's 8, C is negative 35. So if I'm going to use my formula of opposite of B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC, that's all underneath the radical, and then it's all underneath or over 2A. Now, what I would tell you with the B, don't call it a negative, call it the opposite. Okay, because if you get into the habit of calling it a negative, then you're always going to want to make it negative. But if it starts out as a negative, then it's going to obviously change as a positive. So opposite of B, so what's the opposite of positive 8? Negative 8 plus or minus I'm going to go 8 squared, and I just put so 8 squared minus 4 times a, which is 3, times negative 35, which is c, and then I usually close the square root just so I don't run out of room. Divided by 2a, or 2 times 3. Now, here's what I would suggest is I would lump this negative with the 4 whenever I multiply it. So what that means is if I'm just going to rewrite negative 8, so I have negative 8 plus or minus, what is 8 squared? 64. And then everything back here I would multiply together. So I would take negative 4 times positive 3 times negative 35. Okay? The reason why I lump that negative with the 4 is so I don't have to worry about changing any signs. I can just take it for what it's worth. If it's going to be a positive, I can go ahead and just put a plus sign. If it's going to be a negative, I can go ahead and put the subtraction sign. So negative 4 times 3 times negative 35 is a positive 140. How much? 420. So a positive 420. And then it's all divided by 6. So now, again, I'm just going to worry about my radical. I'm not going to do anything with the negative 8 or the 6. I'm just going to leave it as is right now. And then I'm going to add 64 and 420 and get 484. And then it's all over 6. Now, if you want to shorten that, that's fine. But I'm just going to do it to where I can get everything worked out. Now I need to figure out what the square root of 484 is. First things first is I would check to see if it's a perfect square. So can I take the square root of 484 and is it going to be a wash and be a regular normal number? Yeah, what's it going to be? 22. If it doesn't, then I need to obviously simplify it. So I have negative 8 plus or minus 22, all divided by 6, not 8, my fault. Now, what I would suggest, since you have two different values, I would go ahead and separate it just for, at least for now, and have negative 8 plus 22 and divide by 6, and then have negative 8 minus 22 and divide by 6. So then you can not forget anything. So negative 8 plus 22 is going to be 14. 14 divided by 6, or 14 over 6 is going to reduce to 7/3. That's one of my answers. And then negative 8 minus 22 is negative 30. Divided by 6 is a negative 5. So my two solutions are 7/3 and negative 5. Now, this one we could have, everything kind of came out, we could have factored this. Okay? If you would have rather factored, you could have factored it, that's fine. Okay? It may or may not have been just as easy. It's really up to you and as far as how well you factor. Okay? But know that in this case, factoring was an option. Now, completing the square, probably not an option because you had a 3 and an 8, not a good idea. Okay? You couldn't isolate it. So realistically on this one, you either could have factored it or you could have obviously used completing the square. Had a request for 4. So first things first, get everything to one side. So whenever I do, I'm going to have 6x squared minus 1x minus 11 equal to 0. Again, you can check to see if I can factor it. You can try and say, okay, there are two numbers that I can multiply together to get negative 66 and combine to get a negative 1. Maybe, maybe not, probably not. Okay, I don't want to do completing the square because I have a 6 in front of my x squared and I have a negative 1 in front of my x. I can't isolate it, so quadratic formula is going to be the best option here. So again, I would write down what A is, what B is, and what C is. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. I just do it just so I kind of have everything in one spot. And then I can just plug it straight in to my formula. So the opposite of B is 1 plus or minus negative 1 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 11. All of that is underneath the radical, and then it's over 2 times 6. So again, I'm going to do everything inside here first, and again, I'm going to put the negative with the 4 and multiply those values there. So I have 1 outside, so I have 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 negative 4 times 6 times negative 11, 264. All over 12, 2 times 6. So I have to add 1 and 264. Hopefully that's not too difficult. So once I get to this point, now it becomes, is 265 a perfect square? No. So it's going to have a radical somewhere. It may just be the square root of 265. Is there a perfect square that I can factor out of 265? Whoop, wrong one, wrong thing. There we go. So nothing can be factored out, so then I'm just going to stop right there, and it's just going to be that value. Okay, that's your exact value. I do not want a decimal. Okay, just leave it like that. Since I can't do anything with 265, go from there. So with 3, first things first, again, you can always move. It doesn't really matter which way you move, but let's be smart about this. Which one, what do I need to move? I have negative 2x squared on the left side, and then I have negative 2x plus 3 on the right. What would be the smart thing to move to another side? The 2x squared, the negative 2x squared. It doesn't matter if it's 0 equals 2x squared minus 2x plus 3, or if you would have done negative 2x squared plus 2x minus 3. Okay, that wouldn't have mattered, because it would have just changed your A and your B and your C values, but I'm still doing everything the same way. So I'm still going with A as a positive 2, B as a negative 2, and C as a positive 3. So opposite of B, so 2 plus or minus square root of B squared, so negative 2 squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2A, so 2 times 2. So do everything inside of the radical first. Again, group that negative with the 4. It'll make it a lot easier whenever you multiply. So I have 2 plus or minus square root of 4 minus 24. all over 4. So what's 4 minus 24? Negative 20. Okay, so it's 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 20 all over 4. Now, it's negative 20. So I know that I'm going to have to pull out an I. How else can I simplify the square root of 20? So like what's going to change there? Yeah. Right. So 2 plus or minus, you can go I, and if I'm going to kind of overwork this and put a little more than I need to. Okay, I broke up the 20. I brought the I out because it was negative. And then, so I have square root of 4, which is 2. So I'm looking at 2 plus or minus 2I times the square root of 5 over 4. Now, am I finished? If I ask that question, what do you think the answer is? Probably not. Why am I not finished? Everything is divisible by 2, right? So I can turn that into a 1. I can turn that into a 1. I can turn this into a 2. So completely simplified is 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 5 over 2. It's going to stay exactly like that there.